Rachel and Eric Donovan were the picture of suburban perfection, until Rachel discovered Eric had a secret wife and child living in Dubai. Within days, she vanished without a trace. What looked like betrayal turned into a murder that would cross international borders and uncover one of the most chilling double lives the world had never expected. Rachel Donovan had everything she thought she wanted: a loving husband, 2 happy children, and a beautiful home in a peaceful London suburb. Her husband, Eric, was a successful international business consultant who traveled often for work. His contracts frequently took him to Dubai, sometimes for weeks at a time. It wasn't unusual for Rachel to run the household solo, attending school meetings, managing bills, and raising the children while Eric was away. Over the years, she had grown used to his absence and even found comfort in the routine. Eric's returns were always grand. He brought expensive gifts: designer handbags, jewelry, toys for the kids. He took the family on vacations, posted polished photos online, and always had stories to tell from distant cities. To friends and neighbors, they were the golden couple. Rachel stayed grounded, charming, and generous, while Eric played the role of the accomplished, globe-trotting provider. But something began to shift. It started small: missed calls, vague explanations, strange charges on their joint account. Rachel noticed that Eric was increasingly protective of his phone. He had changed his passwords and grew tense if she entered the room while he was typing. He claimed it was due to confidential work. She wanted to believe him, but her instincts said otherwise. Over the next few months, her unease deepened. He left for trips with little notice. His return dates changed last minute. He was distant when he was home, and though he still brought gifts, the warmth behind them felt hollow. Rachel didn't want to believe her marriage was falling apart, but the man who once confided in her now felt like a stranger in his own home. The breaking point came one afternoon in early spring. Rachel was organizing receipts for their accountant and found one that didn't fit. It was a hotel bill from a luxury resort in Dubai. The dates overlapped with a time Eric had claimed he was attending a business seminar in Abu Dhabi. The address on the bill wasn't near the conference center. Something didn't add up. Her stomach turned as she stared at the receipt. Part of her wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to a client meeting or a booking mix-up. But a deeper part of her knew this was no mistake. She began searching through other documents, bank statements, travel itineraries, and frequent flyer logs. Discrepancies started piling up. There were trips she never knew about, charges at restaurants she didn't recognize, and flight records that contradicted what Eric had told her. Rachel didn't confront Eric immediately. She needed proof. For the first time in their marriage, she crossed a line she never thought she would. She hired a private investigator. It took less than a week for the investigator to uncover the truth. Eric Donovan had a second family in Dubai. He was living under a variation of his name, using his middle name as a surname, and had married a woman named Layla. They had a child together, a boy around 5 years old. There were photos, apartment records, and social media posts under a different account. Eric had created an entire life separate from the one he had in London. Rachel felt her world collapse. Every family dinner, every family photo, every bedtime story she had read to her kids while Eric was working late, they all seemed to shatter into lies. She had loved him for over a decade, and in return he had built a double life halfway across the world. The betrayal was unbearable, but Rachel didn't break. She collected everything: the investigator's report, bank logs, travel documents, emails. She began working with a solicitor in secret, planning a divorce that would expose Eric for who he really was. Her priority was to protect her children and secure full custody before he could manipulate the system or disappear entirely. Rachel scheduled a meeting with her solicitor for the following week. The plan was to file for divorce, initiate asset freezing procedures, and prepare a custody petition. She was nervous, but determined. She had rehearsed the conversation she would have with Eric once she had everything in motion. She wanted to face him with evidence, with dignity, with strength. But Rachel never made it to the meeting. On the night of her disappearance, everything had seemed normal. She had picked up the kids from school, cooked dinner, and sent a brief email to her solicitor confirming their appointment. That was the last known contact. Security footage later showed her at a local pharmacy picking up a prescription. She looked calm, composed. Nothing appeared out of place. The next morning, Eric reported her missing. He claimed he woke up and found her gone, her phone off, and her car still in the driveway. He suggested she had been under stress and might have left voluntarily. But Rachel's phone was soon discovered in a storm drain. Her purse was still at home, and her car untouched suggested she had never gone far. What had started as a tale of betrayal was turning into something far more sinister. The truth Rachel had uncovered didn't just threaten a marriage. It threatened the life Eric had built in secret. And in the days to come, the secrets buried across 2 continents would begin to surface in ways no one expected. Detectives began their investigation into Rachel Donovan's disappearance with urgency, knowing that the first 48 hours were critical. She was a mother, a community volunteer, and a woman with no history of erratic behavior. Her car was untouched. Her phone had been found water-damaged but not far from home. She hadn't taken any clothes, cash, or essentials. Her credit cards hadn't been used. The idea that she had simply walked away didn't make sense. Eric Donovan insisted he had no idea where Rachel had gone. He told investigators she had been under stress lately, likely due to his travel schedule, and suggested she might have needed a break. He said he went to bed around 11 p.m. and noticed she wasn't home when he woke at 6:30 a.m. He said he waited a few hours before calling police, hoping she would return. From the start, detectives found his demeanor odd. He showed little concern, answered questions with mechanical precision, and offered no theories about where his wife might be. He didn't appear angry or panicked, just detached. When asked if they had any recent marital issues, he vaguely mentioned typical tension from work and parenting. He made no mention of infidelity or the private investigation Rachel had launched. Rachel's family was alarmed. Her sister, Julia, flew in from Manchester and told detectives Rachel had recently confided in her about something serious, but had said she needed a few more days before revealing the full story. She never got the chance. Julia also confirmed that Rachel had hired legal counsel, and a search of Rachel's home office revealed notes, printed bank records, and a contact card for a local solicitor. When police reviewed the pharmacy security footage, they confirmed that Rachel had been alone and in good health. Her body language didn't suggest fear or distress. She left the store, walked to her car, and then vanished. No known witnesses saw her after that. Her car remained in the driveway, untouched and locked. There was no sign of forced entry in the home, no indication she had run away or packed for travel. As suspicion around Eric grew, authorities began examining his travel history. They found something strange. Less than 24 hours after Rachel was last seen, Eric boarded a flight to Dubai. He had told police he was awaiting word from Rachel, yet he had departed the country almost immediately. He claimed it was for work, but the trip had not been scheduled in advance. He had bought the ticket that same day, just hours after filing the missing persons report. This detail set off alarms. Investigators flagged his trip and requested cooperation from UAE authorities. Meanwhile, a forensic sweep of the Donovan home was ordered. Inside the garage, hidden behind shelves near a utility sink, forensic technicians discovered a small amount of dried blood on the concrete. It had been partially cleaned, but enough remained to collect a sample. DNA testing confirmed it was Rachel's. At the same time, Eric's digital activity began to tell its own story. Analysis of his computer and cloud storage revealed encrypted folders, After gaining access, police uncovered emails, photos, and documentation of a second life. Eric had been living in Dubai under the name Eric L. Donovan, his middle name used as a surname. He had married a woman named Layla, using forged paperwork, and had fathered a son with her 5 years earlier. He owned a small apartment in the Marina district and maintained a separate bank account to fund this life. The depth of the deception stunned investigators. This wasn't a fling or a mistake. Eric had created a full identity, maintained a relationship for years, and coordinated his trips around both families. Rachel had discovered everything just before her disappearance. The story broke in the local press within days. Neighbors who had once admired the Donovans were now watching news vans line their street. Rachel's friends described her as warm and intelligent, a devoted mother who never would have left her children. The media latched onto the sensational elements: the secret family in Dubai, the missing wife, the quiet suburban facade cracking open. 3 weeks after Rachel vanished, Dubai authorities made a grim discovery. During excavation for a new housing development, workers unearthed a large suitcase buried in a shallow pit outside city limits. Inside was Rachel's body, wrapped in plastic and blankets. Her passport and a manila folder of legal documents were sealed in a watertight bag. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of her head. The cause of death was clear. Shipping records provided the final link. Investigators discovered that Eric had arranged for a locked cargo container to be shipped from London to Dubai days before his flight. He had used a false company name and declared the contents as tools and supplies. The dimensions matched the suitcase found at the burial site. Within 48 hours, Eric was arrested at a hotel in Dubai. He denied everything at first, claiming he was being set up, that Rachel had been unstable and possibly orchestrated the entire thing to ruin him. But the evidence was too precise, too overwhelming. He was charged with premeditated murder and unlawful transport of a human body. Back in London, the case rocked the community. Rachel's children were placed in temporary care while custody arrangements were processed. Her family mourned not only the loss of a sister and mother, but the betrayal of someone they had once trusted completely. The crime was no longer just a domestic tragedy. It was international, calculated, and unforgettable. What began as a wife's quiet search for truth had uncovered a double life built on lies. And in trying to escape the consequences, Eric had crossed a line that would cost him everything. The news of Rachel Donovan's body being found in Dubai sent shockwaves through both the United Kingdom and the UAE. A suburban wife and mother murdered, her body smuggled across international borders and buried in a suitcase, was something straight out of a thriller. But this story was real. Headlines were relentless. Images of Rachel smiling at a garden party or holding her children filled news reports alongside mugshots of Eric Donovan, now in custody in a Dubai detention center. The timeline was now clear to investigators. Rachel had uncovered her husband's secret double life, his second family, his lies, the offshore accounts, and his deceit. She had been gathering evidence in preparation for a divorce and custody battle. But before she could take legal action, Eric made his move. Authorities concluded that the murder had been meticulously planned. Eric's flight to Dubai, just hours after reporting Rachel missing, had not been a coincidence. He had shipped a locked container 3 days before her disappearance. Inside that container, hidden among false compartments and padded insulation, was the suitcase that would later be found buried in the desert. Authorities believed Rachel was killed in her home the night she returned from the pharmacy. The bloodstains in the garage, her damaged phone found in a drain, and her abandoned car all supported that theory. In Dubai, police began unraveling Eric's second life. He had presented himself as a British investor under the name Eric L. Donovan. He owned a luxury 2-bedroom apartment and had business ties with minor real estate ventures. His wife in Dubai, Layla, claimed she knew nothing of his London family. She believed they had met while he was living abroad for work. She thought his frequent trips back to the UK were simply for business. Investigators were skeptical at first, but Layla's story checked out. She provided records, photos, and travel logs, showing how carefully Eric had kept both lives separate. He had never allowed her to visit the UK, never introduced her to his family, and kept explanations vague. She was devastated. To her, he had been a devoted husband and father. She had no idea he had another wife, another home, and 2 more children. Once she was cleared of any involvement, Layla filed for divorce and moved to a different city with her son. Meanwhile, Eric's trial was being prepared. Authorities decided to prosecute him in Dubai, where the body was discovered and the shipping container had arrived. The UK government supported the extradition and provided evidence collected during the initial investigation. The case was complex but solid. Physical evidence, travel records, digital communications, and Rachel's own documented suspicions created a damning narrative. In court, the prosecution painted Eric as a manipulative man living 2 lies. They described how he had married Rachel for stability and social image and Layla for passion and secrecy. They suggested he viewed people as extensions of his plans, tools he could control or discard. When Rachel became a threat, he didn't panic. He planned. The courtroom was tightly secured, with press access limited due to international attention. Inside, Eric maintained his innocence. He claimed Rachel had attacked him during an argument and that her death was an accident. He said he panicked and decided to hide the body out of fear, not guilt. But his version didn't hold up under scrutiny. The blows to Rachel's head showed no sign of defensive struggle. The concealment and international transport of her body pointed to calculation, not desperation. The suitcase itself became a key piece of evidence. Experts testified about its structure, the tools used to modify the container it was shipped in, and the shipping paperwork signed in Eric's handwriting. The bag had been reinforced to prevent smell, leakage, or damage during transit. This wasn't the work of someone acting on impulse. One of the most chilling revelations came from Eric's browser history. Weeks before the murder, he had searched for phrases like, "how to dispose of a body internationally," and "fastest shipping route from UK to UAE." He had studied customs regulations, container inspections, and decomposition timelines. These weren't random searches. They were a blueprint. Rachel's family flew to Dubai to attend part of the trial. Her sister Julia gave a victim impact statement on behalf of the children. She described how Rachel had been a protective, loving mother, how she had tried to do the right thing by gathering legal evidence rather than confronting Eric with rage. Julia's voice cracked as she explained how Rachel had trusted the system to protect her, never expecting that uncovering the truth would cost her life. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered their verdict. Eric Donovan was found guilty of premeditated murder, illegal transport of human remains, and falsification of identity and shipping documents. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. The Dubai court also banned him from ever applying for reduced sentencing or transfers. Back in the UK, Rachel's children remained in the care of her sister. The family worked to rebuild a sense of stability, changing their last names and moving to a different town. The Donovan home was eventually sold, and the neighborhood gradually returned to its quiet routine, though the memory of what happened never quite faded. Eric E.'s crimes had not just ended Rachel S.'s life. They had dismantled the carefully constructed illusion he had lived behind for years. A father, a husband, a businessman, all masks that had hidden the mind of a killer. The story remained in public memory not just because of its horror, but because of how ordinary it had all seemed. Until it wasn't. The sentencing of Eric Donovan closed the legal chapter of the case, but for those who had known Rachel, the real aftermath was only beginning. Her children, Emma and Thomas, were placed in the care of her sister Julia, who had fought through months of hearings to gain permanent custody. The two children had been told their mother had gone away at first, a softened truth meant to protect them, but as time went on and the trial played out in headlines, the reality became unavoidable. They had questions. Some were too young to understand all the details, but they understood enough to know something had gone terribly wrong. Julia moved the children out of the London suburb where Rachel and Eric had lived. The house, once warm and full of life, now felt like a hollow shell. The community, too, had been shaken. Neighbors avoided talking about the case in public, but behind closed doors, it dominated conversations. People who had once praised Eric now spoke of him with disbelief and disgust. Rachel's absence was felt not just in her home but across the neighborhood. In the school playgrounds, the local shops, the PTA meetings she used to attend without fail. The Donovan house stood empty for months before a quiet for sale sign was posted. Potential buyers were rare, and when they did visit, they often left quickly. Rumors swirled that the house was haunted or cursed, though nothing supernatural had ever been confirmed. What was certain, however, was that the place carried a dark history now. The neatly trimmed hedges and painted shutters couldn't erase what had happened behind its walls. As for Eric, he began serving his life sentence in a Dubai prison, known for its strict regime and minimal privileges. Though he had been found guilty, he never publicly admitted to the murder. He refused interviews, ignored letters, and remained mostly silent during his incarceration. Layla, Eric's second wife in Dubai, also vanished from public life. After her testimony and the annulment of their marriage, she moved to a remote area with her young son. It was said she had changed her surname and refused all media requests. The betrayal she experienced was different but no less damaging. She had believed in a man who had lied to her every day. She had built a family with someone capable of murder, and that realization left her fearful, isolated, and angry. She never made a public statement again. Meanwhile, the story took on a life of its own in the public eye. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. Documentaries were produced, one even featuring a dramatized reconstruction of the events. Online forums debated how Eric had managed to live two lives for so long. Some criticized Rachel for not leaving earlier, failing to understand how deception, manipulation, and control often unfold slowly, almost invisibly. Others viewed her as a quiet hero, someone who tried to fight back in the safest way she knew, by gathering evidence and planning her escape through legal means. Unfortunately, she had underestimated just how far Eric would go to keep his secrets buried. Years later, the case remained a chilling example in university criminal psychology lectures. Professors used it to explore how sociopathic behavior can be concealed beneath charm and routine. Law students studied the jurisdictional complexities involved when a murder crosses international lines. Not vengeful or dramatic, but focused on doing what was right for her children. She never expected violence. She thought the law would shield her. That assumption cost her life. A memorial was later established in a London park Rachel loved to visit. A simple plaque under a flowering tree read, "In memory of Rachel Donovan, a mother, a sister, a friend. She sought the truth and paid the price. May her courage never be forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of her death, flowers appear at the base of the tree, sometimes from her children, now growing up and forging their own paths, sometimes from strangers who were touched by her story. For the public, the case eventually became part of a long line of tragic headlines. But for Rachel's family, the pain never faded entirely. They rebuilt slowly, forming new routines, trying to create happiness where grief had once rooted itself. Julia often spoke to Emma and Thomas about their mother in the present tense, telling them what she would have thought, what she would have said, how she would have smiled at their achievements. In doing so, she kept Rachel alive in the ways that mattered most. Though Eric's name faded from the news and his face disappeared from screens, the impact of what he had done lingered in all the spaces he had once touched. Rachel's voice had been silenced, but her story continued to echo through the people who refused to let her be forgotten. As the years moved forward, the world outside slowly forgot the name Eric Donovan, but the legacy of what he did lived on in quieter, more personal ways. For Rachel's children, Emma and Thomas, life had split into two clear chapters: before their mother's death and after. What they lost could never be replaced, but under the steady care of their Aunt Julia, they learned to live again. Not by forgetting, but by remembering with clarity and purpose. Julia raised them in a new town where they could start fresh. The siblings grew up with therapy appointments in place of piano lessons, court documents stored where childhood mementos should have been. But despite the trauma, they showed resilience. Emma, the older of the two, became fiercely protective of her younger brother. She spoke rarely of her father, except to make one thing clear: he was no longer part of who they were. Thomas, curious and thoughtful, often asked questions Julia struggled to answer. He didn't remember much of Rachel, but he clung to photos and recorded videos like lifelines to the past. As they matured, both children became active in causes related to domestic abuse awareness. Emma began writing essays in school that caught the attention of her teachers, and eventually, she gave a speech at a youth conference about living through hidden violence. Her words, steady and fearless, left the audience in stunned silence. That speech was later shared widely online, with viewers praising her strength and clarity. She never named her father directly, but made it known that her mother's truth would never be buried again. Meanwhile, journalists who had once sensationalized the story moved on to newer crimes and fresher scandals. But one investigative reporter stayed in touch with the family. After building trust over the years, he published a long-form article titled "The Two Lives of Eric Donovan," exploring not just the murder but the systems that had failed Rachel, how no one questioned Eric's frequent absences, how no flags were raised about his financial double-dealing, and how Rachel's attempts to protect herself had gone unheard until it was too late. The article went viral and reignited public conversation about how hidden abuse and manipulation often go unnoticed. Rachel's case was eventually used in government discussions about cross-border investigations and the legal protections available for victims of suspected domestic crime. Though no new law carried her name, her story influenced several procedural reforms. Police were now required to follow up on missing person cases involving relationship breakdowns with additional scrutiny. Financial tracking between jurisdictions was updated to detect signs of double lives or identity manipulation. And domestic violence support services received renewed funding for early intervention efforts. Even in prison, Eric Donovan could not fully escape the consequences of his actions. He had become infamous within the facility, not for violence, but for the sheer complexity of his crime. Inmates knew his name. Some resented his arrogance. Others were fascinated by the dual life he'd maintained for so long. He remained quiet, avoided confrontation, and rarely spoke to staff unless necessary. He received no visitors, no letters, no contact with the outside world. Over time, he faded into the background, just another life sentence marked on the registry. A man who once controlled 2 families now reduced to a nameless figure in a numbered cell. But Rachel's presence remained strong in the lives of those who loved her. Each year on her birthday, Julia and the children visited the tree planted in her memory. It stood in a London park where Rachel had once taken Emma and Thomas as toddlers, pushing swings and passing them juice boxes in the sun. Now the tree bloomed with bright pink flowers each spring, its branches stretching wider with every passing year. Beneath it, the plaque shone quietly. She sought the truth and paid the price. People sometimes left notes there, small messages folded into plastic sleeves or weighted with stones. Some were from those who had never known Rachel personally but felt connected to her story. Others were from women who had read about her and found the courage to leave abusive relationships, to speak up, or to protect themselves before it was too late. In her silence, Rachel had become a symbol, not of tragedy but of warning, strength, and remembrance. Julia eventually wrote a memoir, not to sensationalize the crime, but to honor the woman who had been her sister, her friend, and her constant. The book focused on Rachel's life before the crime, her kindness, her intelligence, the small details that had been lost in the noise of courtrooms and headlines. It ended with a plea, not for vengeance, but for vigilance. For society to listen more closely to women when their instincts whisper that something is wrong. For justice to move faster, earlier. For children to grow up in homes where secrets don't fester behind polished windows. Rachel's story, at its core, was about betrayal, but it was also about love, truth, and the unthinkable consequences of hidden lives. Though she had died trying to escape the lies surrounding her, the truth she uncovered refused to stay buried. It lived on in her children, in the people she inspired, and in every woman who saw a part of herself in Rachel's fight for freedom. The murder may have silenced her voice, but it couldn't erase her story. And that story, once revealed, became far more powerful than the man who tried to silence it.